Hello everyone, today I'm going to give a response to Paul Joseph Watson's video on emotional incontinence. So if you watch him, he tends to be a very blunt, straightforward guy. I am somebody who has definitely had my own challenges with emotions, and I'm a woman, and I want to basically respond to him in a way that perhaps is more digestible and helpful for women, and in how we perceive things, and to really understand why this is an important topic. And if you don't enjoy pain and suffering, it's actually crucial that you digest some of the stuff, some of the ideas presented, but I'm going to share some of my own thoughts on it as well. I'm not showing the entirety of this video. I'll have that linked below so you can see it in its entirety, but some of this I'll just kind of paraphrase what happened. So here we go.
As Western civilization collapses, which it is, so does our ability to deal with minor day-to-day struggles, without breaking down and wallowing in a pitiful puddle of our own self-indulgent fragility. We're indoctrinated with emotional incontinence by television. America has been collectively turned into Kim Kardashian's cry face.
I've just been so unhappy. You don't think I feel bad?
The masses overdose on reality TV, thinking that it's actually reality, and then mimic it in their own lives.
Yeah, I pretty much gotta agree with this. Perhaps he's exaggerating a bit, but really in life, people just can't seem to handle stuff. I mean, not even just looking at college campuses. But what I'd add to this is that it's not just television that creates this dynamic. I mean, there's stuff that is in magazines, parenting styles, a lot of different things. Just all of society seems to have gotten the message that emotions are always a good thing, and you should always let it out, and you should always do that. And anytime there's any level of bottle it up, it's like, oh no, that's not healthy. That's not healthy to just bottle it in, because then it will explode everywhere. But it's not really taught that perhaps there are more appropriate and acceptable ways of expressing those emotions than just throwing an adult tantrum.
The more insipid sentimentality displayed on TV, the more it manifests itself in the here and now. Vacuous people live their lives vicariously through celebrities and television, then base their own personalities on that. Reality TV doesn't reflect reality. It contrives reality. It relentlessly broadcasts the message that ostentatious OTT, often dumb, displays of emotion are to be imitated.
Take me outside, how about that?
Sorry, I didn't get that. Are you speaking English?
This is such an interesting point about how television is actually creating reality instead of, of course it's not reflecting reality. I think at a base level people would say, of course it doesn't. But nevertheless, especially in an environment where people weren't raised by their mothers, they just kind of go off to daycare, and then schools are expected to be the parent, and people don't really, they've rejected religion to a large extent, and so they don't have anything to base stuff off of. So they just kind of go to what is flowing through their heads. And a lot of times that's TV, and that's a horrible place to learn your information about how to act in life. So yeah, I would agree with this. And again though, I'd add, there's a lot of things that affect this that isn't just reality TV. Because, I'll say, I am somebody who doesn't necessarily watch a lot of TV, or if I do watch reality TV, it's like, So You Think You Can Dance, not, Real Housewives or something. And I think a lot of people, though, are still affected by this mentality, because it just gets out there and people receive these messages and nobody really fights back or pushes back, because it can feel very... like you're not being compassionate to somebody who's crying. And there's kind of this rule that you have to always validate everybody's feelings and everybody's reactions. And this argument in this video, and I would agree with the premise of it, is that it is actually not good for society or for the individual to just allow that kind of behavior and encourage it.
People breaking down and sobbing because Gordon Ramsay had his team renovate their restaurant.
A stunning fresh coat of paint.
Oh my God!
We've updated the upholstery. New plates. Unfucking believable.
No, you're not supposed to cry over a paint job and some new furniture.
So I will say with this, I think that he's sort of overlooking that sometimes why somebody is crying is not because of just a paint job. What it means and the significance of it tends to be much greater than just the thing at face value. So, you know, when people get kind of teary-eyed when they've had a transformation of their home, it's about so much more. And I don't think that that's a bad thing. I mean, it necessarily. If your emotions are out of control and is totally disproportionate and you just look like a lunatic, that's one thing. But to get emotional over these things is authentic and it is true. If you look at Jordan Peterson, one of his rules is to set your house in order before you try to change the world. So a lot of these, transformations of somebody's environment or of their clothes for some of those kind of makeover shows or their weight, that really is about them getting in control of their own personal environment and person and that allows them psychologically to really move forward and conquer new dragons.
Same is true of YouTube. YouTubers are rewarded for emotional incontinence and oversharing. The try not to cry challenge. Constantly crying and whining about their drama and their breakups. The viewers lap it up like water in the desert. Then ape their behaviour.
Oh, why is everyone crying? Such a baby.
Last year, Twitter users revealed what made them cry. The answers included people who cried at not being able to fit all the things they wanted to in their bag, getting the wrong sauce with chicken McNuggets, and crying at a picture of a man because he looked like he was nice.
Okay, that one makes me laugh every time. The person who was crying because somebody looked like they were nice. I do think that perhaps the thread got a little bit more into joke territory or, just laughing at ridiculous instances that you've cried at or something, versus people truly having like an emotional devastation because they can't fit all their things in their bag. I kind of wonder about that. But so I do think that it can be not a horrible response to use humor to say, okay, I see that I was being totally ridiculous and I'm going to laugh at it and, and we can laugh at each other. But if people were taking that as I did these things and I'm crying at these things and that's just the way I should be existing in life and they really have no self-awareness that that's a problem if you are really emotionally wrecked over these things, then that's obviously a big issue. So I'd be curious in the comments to see, if, maybe extreme things that you've seen people cry about that they really didn't seem to understand that it was insignificant. To me, that's a really big difference.
Why are we constantly told that there's a stigma around depression, that there's a stigma around expressing emotion? There isn't. The opposite is true. It's constantly drilled into us that depression is normal and that emotional incontinence and oversharing is to be encouraged. You can barely go 2 minutes without seeing someone drone on about how depressed they are on Facebook or Twitter or YouTube. This has two consequences. It trivializes actual depression and it incentivizes weak-mindedness. Dalrymple again, where once emotional restraint and self-control were admired, now it's emotional incontinence that the British aim for. It's as if they had undergone potty training in reverse. The English have been persuaded that emotions are like pus in an abscess. If they are not released by screaming and shouting, hugging and crying, wailing and raging, and the more publicly the better, they will turn inwards and cause emotional septicemia. The person who controls himself is not only a figure of fun, but a traitor to his own best interests. We've got it better than anyone in human history. Our emotional indulgences are catered for like never before, and yet depression continues to rise.
I agree about this with, people do always say there's a stigma around this. And yeah, there is not a stigma around depression anymore. There's not a stigma around ADD or anxiety or any mental challenge, right? Okay, so And I think the way that we're looking at a lot of these mental disorders, illnesses, whatever you want to call them, is really the wrong way to look at them, because we're sort of taught that it's this illness that just comes upon you and has nothing related to the way you were nurtured. It has nothing to do with your biology, or no, like it has everything to do with your biology, but there's nothing you can do about it. I think that is this victim mentality within mental challenges is so prevalent, and I think it's so unhelpful. But what I will say is that I don't think it's necessarily a problem to talk about it. And actually, I will, link some of the videos I've made about depression and my depression story. But I think there is a difference, and you can't judge just anybody who's talking about depression as, oh, you're just wallowing in your, in your weak-mindedness. Like, that's really harsh and not helpful. I think what we should be doing is wanting to actually help people who are struggling with it, and care about the result of helping people feel better. And once they kind of get a grip on that, then they're more able to go about with the rest of their lives and be productive in society, achieving, solving other problems in the world. It kind of goes again back to Jordan Peterson's, idea about setting your own house in order. You have to set your own mental house in order. But what we want to do is not encourage people in that, like, your mental health should just be totally in shambles all the time, and that's totally okay and normal, and we don't want you to feel bad about it, so we're just going to say this is how, people exist. And it's like, no, that's not how people need to exist, so there's a difference. But I think the way he says it really does trivialize it to a point that's really not helpful for anybody who is listening to that, or who is challenged in those areas. So that's what I'd have to say about that. And without watching each one of those depression stories, you don't really know that all of those people are just feeling sorry for themselves. A lot of people, like I like to think of myself, like to share a more encouraging message and hope for people. And then he also proceeds to then talk about people who have real problems, like actual war kind of PTSD issues and whatnot. Again, I don't think that's a very helpful approach if his goal is to actually help people versus just judge people. I think there's other ways of phrasing that than acting like they have real problems, you don't have real problems. But obviously there are some people who have experienced much more intense situations than other people. But he obviously does not know each individual person's scenario, and that's why I personally encourage people, if you're challenged in that area, to really go to not a psychiatrist who just maybe just kind of want to give you drugs, but like a certified counselor, or even somebody who's like a life coach who's really focused on helping you move into a positive mentality and learn to help equip you with the tools to reframe things. Like, there's so much stuff, there's so much self-help out there too, with different books you can read to start seeing the world through a very different worldview. Because ultimately, I like to encourage actual solutions rather than just saying, well, you're just stupid, because I'd like to see people experience less pain and suffering, and I recognize that if in your head there is real pain and suffering, you sort of are feeling that. But the solutions to the two things is very different, because if you're creating your own pain and suffering in your head, what needs to be fixed is the way you're thinking about it in order to stop it. Whereas somebody else who has some other kind of pain and suffering that's happening more on a physical level, they're going to have a different solution, right? So we want to end pain and suffering, but as a society, I do think that we do need to recognize, at least encourage people to recognize, what, I know there's something wrong with my perspective, and it doesn't make sense that I'm feeling this disproportionately bad about what's going on, but they still need a solution, besides just stop crying.
Sign that excessive emoting is making us both more insecure and more insincere. As Theodore Dalrymple wrote, we live in an age of emotional incontinence, when they who emote the most are believed to feel the most.
I love the quotes that he has in this video, and I think what he's getting into now about just the reality of what the effect is of emoting more and more and more and more is not actually helping people. It's not actually helping people have less depression. And I know some people may say, well, there's just more people who feel okay with saying that they're depressed, and really everybody was always that depressed. I am just really skeptical of that belief. I just am. I don't know. And I don't know how you can actually measure it, but yeah, people are not in a good headspace right now, and I just know from the effect that Christianity has had on my life, where I would be without Christianity is a very dark and bad place, where depression would have taken over a heck of a lot more than, something I have to just kind of keep trying to transform my mind, by renewing my mind with God's Word. So I just really strongly believe that back in the day when people really had strong faith and they had stronger families, that they did not have this lostness about them. And maybe they did. Maybe this is a problem that's always been going on through society. But either way, I think we can look and say, you know what, I don't think this is working. Depression certainly is not decreasing by this, constant, emoting, and it's always okay, and it doesn't matter what situation you're in, and like we need to at least be able to step back and see with some logic when it isn't disproportionate to what our circumstances have, and we need to, get more equipped with basically mindset practices and how to build our strength mentally. And then that will help us to be much better equipped for when something much more significant happens in our life, in our circumstances, that could, then we'll be that much more prepared mentally. He then also goes on to talk about the pseudo-bulbar effect, which is emotional incontinence. And, look that up on your own, but here's kind of my take on it, is that I feel like perhaps he is showing the more extreme people, but then it may not even actually match the true disorder that is said to be caused potentially by brain injury. So, some of these people are a bit out of hand, but we have to remember, perhaps people could control themselves better if they knew that socially it was unacceptable. But if socially it is acceptable, they're gonna go ahead and do it. Because it feels kind of better to sort of, not be as in control sometimes. So I think that's something to really keep in mind. Like the difference between somebody just feels confident and comfortable just sharing it and letting themselves cry because they know nobody is going to act as if they shouldn't be doing that, versus the actual inability to control it. The less and less and less you practice controlling your emotions and waiting for a more appropriate setting to work through whatever's going on, the less ability you'll have to keep control of your emotions. And I would argue that is not a good thing. We want to have that potential control, because sometimes we even need to act in the midst of our emotions. If something, emergencies would be certainly an example. And, the whole idea of also in emergencies, you need to calm down. Well, if we never practice calming down, we never practice getting it together, we're not going to be very capable in life. We're not going to be able to go very far in life, and really impact, tons of people in a very meaningful way if we can just not get a grip on ourselves.
Why is our culture normalizing borderline personality disorder? Why are we being convinced to embrace mental illness? Because it's easier to control and coerce a population that's permanently trapped in a heightened state of emotional frailty than one that has a strong cerebral constitution. Because the people who can't control their own disposition then become control freaks themselves.
If people can't control their own emotions, then they have to start trying to control other people's behavior.
Yes, this is exactly what we're seeing with the trigger warnings and the safe spaces and all of this. And in Canada with the whatever bill that is talking about the gender pronouns, this is, I can't handle if somebody says something that I don't like, and therefore those people, we need to use the government's monopoly on force to force people to speak in a way that I can handle. It really is extremely dangerous because it is just throwing us into an authoritative government. So, all of the, free speech is hate speech and, you shouldn't be able to say stuff. Well, you know what? There wouldn't be a constitutional protection against free speech if we were talking about polite speech. It's about ideas that maybe some people don't like. And if they are truly horrendous, then people should be able to look at it and say no and stand against that and influence people without forcing people to act a certain way or to speak a certain way or to accept certain lifestyles that they don't accept. So, it's just one of these things. This is so prevalent in society, and, I really want to urge anyone who's watching this to really kind of check yourself for this and have some self-awareness of, am I trying to in any way force other people to behave a certain way? Even with a lot of this, affirmative action kind of stuff, and I saw in California, they're trying to make, I think for all public companies, they need to have a woman on the board, and it needs to happen within the next year. Well, it's like women feeling like offended because they're not in those positions, which perhaps has something to do with women's choices and things like that, not just sexism, but we're trying to force people to behave a certain way and say, you have to do this because I think that it's sexist if you do that. And now we're going to use the government's power to force this on people. This is just the opposite of freedom. So anybody who cares about freedom, like any of these are authoritarian bents need to be dismissed, even if it makes people feel bad. It's just this mask where we feel so guilty about causing people's feelings to get hurt, and we really lose sight of reality and that life can be hard. There is rejection. There is some level of bias. Like, that is just life, and what's actually more empowering for people is to help them work through it instead of try to control what everybody else is doing.
This is called stoicism, a branch of philosophy that stretches back to the 3rd century BC. Stoicism is the antidote to emotional incontinence. Stoicism is a realistic alternative to nihilism, and I'll devote an entire video to it in the near future. Look, if we've reached the point where people are bringing emotional support pigs onto airplanes because they're so wretchedly uncomfortable with their own emotions they can't get through a 3-hour flight, maybe time to ask if our society is overly emotional. If we've reached the point where people are so devoid of any sense of mental stability, they claim to have 400 different personalities, some of which are children, meaning they can't even take care of their own basic needs. Maybe time to ask if the parameters of what society accepts as a genuine mental illness have been stretched too far. Maybe time to ask if our obsession with emotional incontinence is changing us in ways that can never be reversed.
So I thought that was a super strong ending, and I'm going to have to end this video because my girls are out and awake now. But yeah, I thought that was hilarious with those pigs. I think that would be so annoying. I cannot imagine going on a flight like that. I would have my own emotional breakdown because that pig sound is very annoying to me. But anyway, I think he has a really good point, and I'd encourage people to look into stoicism a little bit, and I am a big believer in taking various philosophies and figuring out what is most helpful for you in your life to be as effective as you can be as a person in this world. And we should always be open to each other's ideas. If they are truly terrible, we can, of course, dismiss them. But I think there is something to be said about what he's saying, even if he said it in, his harsh, controversial tone that makes him so popular. But anyway, yeah, comment with your takeaway on this video, and I hope this helped. If you like this kind of stuff, I'm always kind of breaking down ideas that are out there, messages in society, feminist and ideas in particular, breaking them down, replacing them with God's truth and just logic. So yeah, better go hit that subscribe button, share, and like this video. All right, have a good day, guys. Bye.